It is early morning in Jerusalem, and a man with his hands bound is standing on stone that Roman soldiers have walked for years. The sky is the color of ash before sunrise, and the man standing in chains has not slept. You are about to watch the most powerful silence in human history. The man leading this interrogation is Pontius Pilate, governor of Judea. He has the power to release a prisoner or crucify him with a single word, and the man standing before him will barely speak.
700 years before this morning, a prophet in exile wrote down what this exact moment would look like. He did not know Pilate's name. He did not know the date. But he knew the silence. We will get to his words. Not yet. Here's the question that should bother you. Everyone thinks they know why Jesus stayed quiet.
Prophecy, right?
Just fulfilling a script written centuries earlier.
That's what most people assume.
They're wrong. Or at least not fully right. There's another reason hiding inside this silence, and it isn't the one you're expecting.
Stay with me.
This is not a story about a man who had nothing to say. This is not a story about fear freezing his tongue. This is a story about the most controlled silence ever spoken in a courtroom, because sometimes saying nothing is the loudest possible answer. Pontius Pilate was not a gentle man. The philosopher Philo described him as stubborn and cruel, a governor who had already provoked riots by hanging Roman shields inside the holy city just to remind everyone who was in charge. The historian Tacitus later confirmed, in a Roman record with no reason to flatter Christians, that a man called Christus was executed under Pilate's order. That one sentence, buried in a history book, confirms the very trial you're about to walk through.
A mob of religious leaders drags the prisoner to Pilate before dawn.
Pilate asked the one question that actually matters under Roman law.
Are you the king of the Jews?
And here, for the first time, Jesus speaks.
You have said so. Careful.
Precise. He doesn't deny it.
He doesn't defend it either.
And the accusations start piling on, and Jesus says nothing. Pilate is stunned. Do you not hear how many things they testify against you? Matthew tells us Jesus gave no answer, not even to a single charge, so much that the governor was greatly amazed.
Sit with that.
A man on trial for his life, with an open door to defend himself, chooses silence instead. You would have spoken.
Almost anyone would have spoken.
Here's what most people miss. Under Roman law, silence was not neutral. A prisoner was expected to answer. Silence could be read as guilt, as contempt, as an insult to the court. Jesus wasn't avoiding a fight. He was walking into one unarmed on purpose. And then, without warning, someone outside the courtroom breaks the pattern. Pilate's wife, later tradition calls her Claudia Procula, sends him an urgent message in the middle of the trial.
Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream. Think about what just happened.
A Roman governor's wife, with no connection to Jewish prophecy, is warned in a dream to stay away from this exact man at the exact moment her husband is deciding his fate. That is not a coincidence a screenwriter would dare to invent. And Pilate reads it and ignores it. Now here's the first real twist. Pilate discovers something that should end all of this instantly. Jesus is from Galilee, which means he's not even under Pilate's jurisdiction.
He's under Herod's.
Relief floods the room.
Pilate finally has his way out.
Send the prisoner away, wash your hands of the whole mess. So Jesus is marched to Herod Antipas, the ruler who executed John the Baptist. And Herod is thrilled. Luke tells us he'd wanted to see Jesus for a long time, hoping to watch him perform a trick like some traveling magician. Herod questions him at length. Jesus says nothing.
Not one word.
Not to the man who could free him with a shrug. Herod mocks him, dresses him in a robe as a cruel joke, and sends him right back to Pilate, which means the way out was never a way out at all.
2 kings, 2 rooms, same morning, same answer.
Silence. And Pilate is right back where he started, except now the mob is angrier and the clock is running out. We need to pause here for a second because what happens next might be the most overlooked scene in the entire trial, and it deserves more than a passing mention. If this story is unsettling you the way it's unsettling me, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.
I read everyone.
There's a custom at Passover. The governor releases one prisoner chosen by the crowd. Pilate offers a choice.
On one side, Jesus.
On the other, a man named Barabbas. Now here's what almost nobody explains properly. The name Barabbas comes from the Aramaic Bar Abba, son of the father.
Sit with that for a second, because it changes everything about this scene.
2 sons of the father are standing in front of that crowd that morning.
One of them is guilty.
Barabbas is a convicted insurrectionist, a man with blood already on his hands, awaiting execution for crimes he actually committed. The other is innocent. He has healed the blind, fed the hungry, forgiven the guilty, and broken no law of God or Rome.
One son of the father deserves to die.
The other does not deserve a single bruise. And the crowd is handed the choice.
Imagine standing in that square.
Imagine the priests moving through the crowd, stirring up the shout before you can think clearly. Imagine the exact moment the decision tips, not because of evidence, not because of justice, but because a mob has decided which son of the father it prefers. Barabbas, they shout.
Give us Barabbas.
The guilty son walks free. The innocent son stays in chains. And if you've ever felt uncomfortable reading that, good. You should. Because that exchange didn't stay in the 1st century. It repeats itself in that courtroom scene for one specific reason, and we're about to get to why. Pilate is losing control of his own trial. This is no longer about one man's guilt. It's about a governor's authority, a city on the edge of riot, and a decision that's already been made by people who never intended to follow the law in the first place. The governor tries one more time. He asks Jesus a question that has echoed through courtrooms and philosophy for 2,000 years. What is truth? The Greek word there is aletheia, what is fully real, fully uncovered. Pilate is standing 3 feet from the answer to his own question. And John tells us that after asking it, Pilate turns and walks away. He asks the question and refuses to wait for the reply.
That might be the saddest sentence in the whole trial. Pilate has Jesus flogged, hoping it will satisfy the crowd. Roman scourging tore flesh from muscle.
Soldiers press a crown of thorns into his scalp and throw a purple robe over his bleeding back as a cruel joke at royalty. And through all of it, the whip, the mockery, the thorns, Jesus does not curse them, does not call down the power that by his own words elsewhere could summon 12 legions of angels in an instant. Pilate brings him out one final time and says 2 words that would echo for 2,000 years. Behold the man.
Now,
remember that other reason we mentioned? The one hiding behind the prophecy.
here it is.
Isaiah wrote, 700 years earlier, "He was oppressed, and he was afflicted. Yet he opened not his mouth, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth." The Hebrew word behind that silence is damam, to be still, to hold utterly quiet in the face of something enormous. That's the prophecy.
That's the part everyone quotes.
But prophecy explains what happened.
It doesn't explain why he chose it.
Here's the part almost no one says out loud. Jesus wasn't only silent because a scroll said he would be. He was silent because the moment he opened his mouth to save himself, he would have stopped being able to save you. Every accusation he refused to answer, he was choosing to carry instead of deny, like the guilty son, Barabbas, walking free while the innocent son took his place in the very same trade the whole crowd had just voted for, without realizing they'd already acted out the entire gospel in miniature. This is not a story about a man with nothing to say. This is not a story about a broken prisoner giving up. This is a story about someone with every legal right to defend himself, choosing the cross instead of the courtroom, on purpose, with his eyes open. Think about the last time you were falsely accused of something, even something small. Think about how badly you wanted to correct the record. Now imagine having the actual power to end the accusation instantly and choosing silence anyway, because someone else's freedom depended on it. A parent will sometimes stay quiet under blame just to protect a child who couldn't survive the consequences alone.
Multiply that instinct by infinity, and you're standing somewhere close to that courtroom floor.
Takeaway number 1. Jesus' silence was written 700 years before Pilate's family ever set foot in Judea. Proof: this moment had been planned long before that morning. Takeaway number 2. Real power doesn't always look like control. Pilate had armies and authority and still couldn't pull one unnecessary word from a bound, bleeding prisoner. The most powerful person in that room was the one in chains. Takeaway number 3. The one that should sit with you the longest. That silence was the trade. Barabbas walked free because someone else stood in his place.
And so did you?
Which part hit you hardest? The two sons of the Father, Herod getting the same silence Pilate got, or the real reason behind the prophecy? Tell me below. Pilate spent that entire morning trying to make one man speak. 2,000 years later, his silence is still speaking.